I think running taught me that I am the limiting factor. My own mind is the limiting factor. It's nobody else. It's not society. It's not the world, whatever. It's just if I want to run this fast, it's up to me and only me. And that translates perfectly to life. Like we are the makers of our own destiny. We are totally in control of our choices and we're not in control of our experiences or the things that happen to us, but we're completely in control of how we react.
I just did a podcast with Aaron Lutzy and Dylan Bowman on Second Nature, talking about brand partnerships and the creator economy and the difference between brand marketing and performance marketing. And it's been really fascinating to be in this space and having been in this space for the last decade, where initially it was like, oh, this is like cool, and maybe we'll test this out, and oh yeah, we should think about having brand ambassadors. And now it's like, people have jobs and their entire focus is working with creators or growth marketing or performance marketing. And it's driving business outcomes that were never possible previously. Talk to me about your experience in working with brands and then ultimately starting your own brand and what that journey has been like.
Yeah. A question I get a lot is like, at what point did I start working with brands? I think a lot of people that are trying to get into content, that's like the $1 million question. Honestly, like when I had just like 4 or 5,000 followers, like brands are so eager to work with those quote unquote micro influencers, people that have small followings but engaged followings. And I mean, you could easily get free product. Like I was getting a ton of free product in exchange for a story or a post. Like brands will do that all day. But I feel like when I started actually getting like paid projects was like after maybe 10,000 followers, 15,000 followers. And again, follower count matters, but not a lot. I think the biggest thing is like how engaged are your followers. So yeah, I started doing, things for like 400 or 500 bucks here or there, little projects, and then just continued to build. And as like my following built, as the engagement built, that's where deals started coming in where I was like, I think I could do this full time. But yeah, like, to your point, I feel like a lot of the bigger running brands were kind of late to the game and actually like doing paid partnerships like that, because like Nike, it's just like this huge beast of a company that there's so many moving parts and stuff. And obviously they have the budgets for it, but like I feel like they're not as eager to grow and to innovate with things like that. Whereas like a smaller company, I can't think of an example, but like maybe a small nutrition company that's just starting out, like they got to be more creative, more innovative. So those are the ones that I worked with a lot that are more eager to invest into creators. So I saw some of those out. And yeah, I think now that all the big brands are kind of coming around to working with creators, they'll have like brand partnerships and like ambassador programs, things like that. And like a big tip to anybody that's trying to do content for a living is I find that those big brands do a lot of just like one-off posts, like Nike or Brooks or somebody will hit me up and just do one post to promote a new shoe. But I find that it's a win-win-win if you can work with a company on like a retainer or a longer term, because it's more authentic for your audience. You win because you get to have this relationship with the brand consistently. It feels more authentic to you when you're promoting the brand. It's more consistent pay. And then I think in return, the brand has higher return on conversions or sales and actually getting customers, because everything feels so much more authentic. So I really try and do that now, of like working with brands over the long term, maybe a 6-month or 12-month contract or
For the
something.
long run.
Exactly. And I think brands are more keen to that now than they were maybe a couple of years ago. I mean, running, it's still a very niche sport, but there's so many people doing it now. Like I feel like everybody runs now. Maybe it's because we're in this like echo chamber, but I feel like it's blown up, at least since I got into it a couple of years ago. And so brands are, I think, still kind of figuring out the best way to go about all that. But I think they're coming around to the idea of and the power of influencer marketing, and not just paying for the elite runners, but like the everyday kind of average creator too, who's probably more relatable.
Totally. It's one of the reasons I've loved working with Puma over the years, like the last year and a half in particular, and consistently. And they invest heavily in the performance side of the sport, but then also like they've leaned into our work together, and working with Boulderthon and some of the activations there. But it's fascinating to see that straddling of the line between a performance athlete and like a dude who's run a 2:59 marathon, and like my ability to play in that arena with those athletes, but not being the high performer as well. I want to go back to something you said previously. And by the way, I know someone's going to be like, "Oh, 2:59 is high performing." Like it's all relative, right? Like these athletes are running in the 2:20s on for the women's side, and 2:08, 2:09 on the men's side. I want to go back to something that you said before about taking the leap to doing it full time. I love the breaking stasis. I really like to understand what it's like to take that leap and what that final piece of inertia or that initial piece of inertia is, or the final thing that pushed you over the edge. Like, what was that like? Talk me through that decision process. And the reason I ask is I think a lot of people are feeling stuck these days, and hearing how people have made changes can hopefully help other people make changes.
100%. Yeah. I think in a perfect world, everybody's an entrepreneur. Everybody works for themselves and gets to do what they want for a living. Yeah. It's definitely scary for sure. I think, I mean, kind of what like led to me ultimately doing it was when I was working for Nick and I started making more content on the side was he kind of gave me this ultimatum of like, okay, you either have to go all in on my company or you're going to have to do your own thing or it's not going to work. And so I was like, well, I'm going to invest in myself. So I guess I'm not going to be here anymore. So that was like, that was basically the breaking point. So I said, okay, I'm just going to, if I'm choosing myself, I'm going to invest in myself and just go all in. So I started coaching people. So at that point I had run a couple sub-3 marathons. And again, nothing like crazy fast or anything, but to the average runner or somebody just getting into running, like that's most people's goal is to try and qualify for Boston. So started coaching people to run sub-3s, qualify for Boston, and incorporate like strength training, nutrition, all these things that I learned at that point. So I had like kind of that going on the side. I had maybe like 10 or 15 clients I was working with. So that was like able to hold me over for a little bit. I was at that point, again, I think I had maybe 3,000 followers on Instagram. So I had some really, really small brand partnerships, like $200-300 here or there. I still had like a couple of my clients when I was doing freelance work before I went to BPN. So just like remote editing for real estate agents or things like that. So that was like a few $100 a month. And it was like all these kind of random things that were able to replace that income for a little bit. So that way, when I did leave, I wasn't like strapped for like, oh, crap, how am I going to pay my rent? And then now that I left my job, now I have all this free time to create better content, create more content, and try and figure out other ways to replace that income. And I think within a month, I had already done that, plus started making even more. So yeah, it's definitely a scary jump. In my opinion, and in my experience, like there's never a perfect time to do anything. You have to just do it, whether it's starting a business, leaving your job, signing up for a race, whatever it is. Like there's never a perfect time to do it. So many of us, I definitely have done it, suffer from paralysis by analysis. You think of all the reasons it could go wrong, all the reasons it could fail. But I think, again, in my experience, things always work out in the end. Like if the content thing didn't work out, I could have gone and got a job somewhere. I could have, I don't know, went and applied on Indeed for 30 jobs and probably got one of them and I would have been okay for a little bit. But you never know unless you try. So I think it's just kind of a risk you have to take and believing in yourself. And I don't know, like my mom does not understand what entrepreneurship is. Like, I think it's maybe a generational thing. Like she's like, how do you even make money? And I'm like, I don't even want to try and explain it, but it's just like, I think a lot of our parents or friends and people in our hometowns are like, go to school, get a good job. It's stable. It's consistent. You get benefits, all this stuff. But I don't know. I've tried doing the like 9 to 5 sit in an office thing and it didn't work for me. And I think a lot of people can probably relate. But again, the biggest thing is just believing in yourself, taking that leap. And if it doesn't work out, there's always something else you can probably fall back on. But I think more often than not, it does work out.